Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a pretty substantial mission. We are going to try and unpack the extraordinary, almost unbelievable journey of Jensen Huang and his company, Nvidia.
Right. It's a story that traces their path from, this niche company selling $200 accessories for
They're
gamers.
basically video game hardware.
Yeah, exactly. To becoming the single most valuable company in the entire world. The indispensable engine of the entire AI revolution.
It really is a story of radical transformation and one that feels like it's still accelerating.
It is. And when you look at the source material for especially Stephen Witt's book, The Thinking Machine, it's all there. The story is just anchored in this personal grit and this stunning, almost prophetic technological foresight.
The scale of the shift is just so hard to get your head around.
I mean, think about it. Nvidia has increased the speed of deep learning applications by over 1,000 times in the last decade. 1,000 times.
That's not just an improvement, that's a whole new kind of computation.
It is. And that acceleration, that 1000x factor, is the fundamental reason we have what we call modern AI.
Right. Everything from ChatGPT writing an essay to Midjourney creating art, Copilot suggesting code.
All of it. It's all running on NVIDIA architecture.
So the central mystery, and this is what we really want to dig into, is how. How did a company that was so laser focused on just rendering graphics for the game Quake?
Making sure a gamer could reach out and frag somebody, as they
Yeah,
used to say.
exactly. How did that company suddenly become the engine for thinking machines? I mean, this move defied conventional business logic for years. It was draining their cash. It was terrifying investors.
And that's the ultimate aha moment of the story. It isn't just a business story. It's a story about the physics of it, the economics of scaling parallel computation, and really the single-minded vision of its CEO.
And our deep dive today is grounded really heavily in Witt's book. It gives us this great chronological path, blending the personal stories from, co-founders and employees with these incredibly dense, incredibly risky technical bets that define the whole company.
So we're going to explore how all that came together to create what is, for all intents and purposes, a monopoly.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this journey, and we have to start right at the beginning with the crucible that forged Jensen Huang's unique and, let's be honest, often very demanding style of leadership.
Yeah.
It is so tempting to start the Nvidia story in that San Jose Denny's in 1993, but to really understand the almost surreal work ethic, the relentless, almost defiant determination of Jensen Huang, you have to go back 2 decades earlier.
You really do. Back to his Appalachian Odyssey.
Absolutely. The foundation of his whole identity and, frankly, the basis for NVIDIA's corporate culture, it was all forged in this extreme adversity starting in 1973.
I mean, just try to imagine this. You're a 10-year-old Jensen Huang, and you and your older brother Jeff are sent 8,000 miles. You're coming from Taiwan and Thailand, and your parents are still abroad. And you land in rural Kentucky.
Specifically, a place called Oneida Elementary. And this was a deeply, deeply challenging environment.
The source material really details it. Huang's undersized, his English was imperfect, and he was the only Asian student.
An immediate target.
An immediate target.
Yeah.
The kids there were often the children of tobacco farmers, coal miners, a lot of deep poverty. The bullying was instant, and it had a really severe racial edge to it.
And the adversity wasn't just, cultural. It was physical. The place he was housed.
Yeah.
It was an extremely strict religious boarding school run by fundamentalists.
Yeah. Huang talks about this constant torment, and the sources detail this one story, the famous bridge anecdote, that just reveals so much about him.
Describe that bridge. It's such a powerful image.
So every day he had to cross this long, rickety, almost derelict pedestrian footbridge. It was suspended over this frigid, rushing water.
Okay.
And the local bullies, their favorite thing to do was to just jump out, grab the thick supporting ropes, and just swing the bridge violently, trying to knock Huang off into the river below.
Wow, so it was genuinely dangerous.
Oh, it was perilous. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the natural response to that is fear, right? Or retreat.
Of course.
But his classmate, a guy named Ben Bays, he recalled that Huang seemed utterly unfazed. He described him as, and this is a quote, like he was having fun.
Having fun.
Yeah.
That level of emotional detachment, that resilience in the face of what is clearly trauma, that became the template for his entire life.
It did. He tried to run a bluff at first, said he was a martial arts expert. That got disproved pretty quickly.
I bet.
But he compensated, not with technique, but with sheer, uncompromising determination. He would just wrestle larger boys to the ground until the bullying stopped.
And he didn't just fight for himself. He actually taught his classmate Bayes how to defend himself, which, that shows this early trait of intense, very practical loyalty.
Exactly. And that compulsion for excellence, it just continued despite this traumatic setting. He wasn't just trying to survive.
He was excelling. He was excelling. I mean, he's sharing a room with a knife fighter. He's cleaning dormitory toilets and cutting brush with a scythe for a summer job. And yet he still earns a silver dollar for being the best student in his class.
So what does that period really tell us about his core operating system?
Well, when he reflects on it, on being bullied and isolated and so far from his parents, his response is so revealingly blunt. He just says, back then, there wasn't a counselor to talk to. Back then, you just had to toughen up and move on.
Wow.
And that response, just internalized resilience, view trauma as an obstacle to be systematically overcome, that's the engine. That's what powered Nvidia through its 2 near-death experiences later on.
So he learned that comfort and consensus were basically enemies of survival.
That's it, exactly.
And that pattern of just hyper-focused excellence, it continued once he moved to Oregon. At Aloha High School, he skipped a grade, had a near-perfect GPA. But where did that specific technical focus start? It was in the computer club with the iconic Apple II. That's where he found his first technical love. He was coding his own version of the game Snake in BASIC.
So the computer was a place where his intense focus could be applied without all the chaos of the outside world.
A controlled environment. And he applied that same focus to other competitive things too.
You mean table tennis?
Table tennis, yeah. He completely mastered the sport at a place called the Paddle Palace. Sometimes he would even sleep there in the ballroom. He was so immersed.
And people who saw him said it wasn't about athleticism.
Not at all. It was his exceptional focus.
Yeah.
Witnesses said he never got stuck, he outworked everyone, and he just seemed to never hit a plateau. He just kept pushing.
That's the quality of someone who approaches everything. Leisure, socializing, like it's a systematic, solvable engineering problem.
Right. And the ultimate proving ground for managing chaos was the Denny's, where he worked as the dishwasher and a server.
He famously said he thinks best under extreme pressure. When the world is just falling apart, he said, I actually think my heart rate goes down.
That environment, the complete unpredictable chaos of a dinner rush, it taught him to manage pressure as his natural state.
And there's that great story about how he adapted to American culture.
It's so telling. He methodically ate his way through the entire menu.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Bacon cheeseburger, the Superbird, chicken fried steak. He treated this crash course in American food and social norms like it was another engineering problem to be solved through exhaustive repetition.
Wait. He methodically ate the entire menu. That's not just adapting to a culture. That's approaching socialization like a controlled experiment.
It is.
Does that manic detail orientation, that need to master every single component, does that show up later in his chip design philosophy?
Oh, absolutely it does. I mean, his work ethic later at LSI Logic, his incredibly demanding nature at Nvidia, they are direct reflections of that need for systemic mastery.
If he learns the entire menu, he knows the entire system.
Right. If he pushes a circuit design to its absolute theoretical limit, he knows exactly where the architecture is going to break.
And that detail orientation, that's what led him to Oregon State University in 1980. He chose electrical engineering, which basically set his life's course in circuit design.
And it's where he met his future wife, Lori Mills. He recognized he was at a disadvantage because he was the youngest kid in the class, so he approached dating with that same systematic focus.
He used his homework ability as his superpower.
He called it his superpower, impressing her with his strong capability to complete homework. She was also a brilliant engineer, so it worked. She became his study partner.
He graduated with highest honors and just timed it perfectly for this accelerating silicon revolution in the 80s.
His career just took off. He started at Advanced Micro Devices AMD at just 20 years old.
For an impressive salary, too, $28,700. That was huge at the time.
It was. And he proposed to Lori at the extravagant AMD Christmas party in 1984. But that celebration was immediately followed by a near tragedy.
The car crash.
Yeah. Driving his Toyota Supra on these snowy mountain roads after the party, he hits black ice, tolls the car, he needed stitches, wore a neck brace for months.
Another severe trauma.
And just like in Kentucky, it seemed to only strengthen his core commitment to his life and his work.
So he moves on to LSI Logic, and this is where he masters these early software design tools, VLSI.
Right, and these tools were revolutionary. They automated circuit design, which freed up engineers to focus on higher architectural problems instead of, these tedious transistor by transistor layouts.
And this is where his surreal work ethic really made him stand out.
Indispensable.
Yeah.
He used this primitive simulator called SPI-C to just push circuits past what anyone else thought was possible. His colleague, a guy named Horstman, he noticed something profound about him.
Which was?
That Huang avoided deep, deep rat holes. He had this ability to make 1 + 1 = 3.
Meaning he could turn a specific customer order into a general tool that benefited the whole company.
Exactly. He saw patterns in scalable systems where everyone else just saw a one-off problem.
And that systematic vision made him the perfect person to handle the notoriously difficult customers he met while working on the Sun GX 3D graphics processor in 1989.
Chris Malachowski and Curtis Prime.
Right.
They were certainly a handful. Prime talks about yelling matches so intense that people thought the team was about to just completely fall apart.
But even with Huang's own bluntness and impatience, they recognized something in him.
They did. They saw his unique blend of deep technical knowledge and leadership fitness. And Huang rose quickly. He was managing a division with $250 million in annual revenue.
But corporate politics got in the way.
A political hiring at LSI caused Huang to defect, and that triggered the decision to launch Nvidia. And the personal risk, I mean, it was enormous.
A massive gamble. His wife, Lori, a brilliant engineer herself at Silicon Graphics, had already left her job for childcare.
So they were down to one income. And Huang had to ask her permission to leave his stable, high-paying job for a startup, knowing they only had 6 months of savings.
But that decision was fueled by this ambition that he didn't even try to hide.
Not at all. Malachowski distinctly remembers Huang telling him he wanted to run something by the time he was 30. It wasn't just about a good job.
It was about building a legacy.
Right. And that ambition was obvious to outsiders, too. An industry analyst who reviewed him wrote on an evaluation that he looked forward to working for him someday.
He radiated inevitability.
You did, and that inevitability was about to be tested in the cutthroat, incredibly crowded world of graphics hardware.
So the stage is set. The idea for this new venture, or NV, it was hatched in the most unconventional of places, a makeshift war room at a Denny's in San Jose in 1993.
Right next to the freeway.
Right.
And Huang, drawing on his restaurant experience, he suggests the quiet area in the back. It was usually full of police officers. A strange setting to be discussing the future of silicon architecture.
In the source material notes that while Malachowski and Priam were just abusing the free coffee refills,
Huang, in this typical gesture, he's ordering plate after plate of food and tipping extravagantly to make up for it.
he was already thinking systematically about how to balance the books, even if it was just a tab at a diner.
Always. So the crucial first step was finding a market vacuum. Why graphics accelerators when it was so risky?
Well, they realized that the big players, Sun, Silicon Graphics, they were all fixated on high-margin, high-end workstations.
And they were completely ignoring the massive, and I mean massive, burgeoning consumer PC video game market.
So that left a void, but it was an incredibly crowded void.
Crowded is an understatement. A graphics expert, John Petty, he advised Huang not to start the company. He said there were already 35 competitors.
And Huang just ignored him. He saw the crowding as a challenge to be overcome with a better architecture, not a reason to retreat.
And they eventually settled on the name Nvidia, which comes from the Latin Nvidia, for envy,
And that was only after they found their first choice. Envision was already taken.
by a company that made recycled toilet paper. It's a great little piece of trivia that shows the chaotic reality behind the polished corporate image.
And those early operations were definitely scrappy. They work out of Priam's condo.
Forced him to move all his furniture into the garage.
And then later, a dingy strip mall office in Sunnyvale next to a bank that was robbed twice.
But even in that chaos, Huang's systematic approach was there. His war room was covered in these meticulous, color-coordinated, all-caps whiteboard diagrams.
Outlining the business strategy, chip architecture, product roadmap.
He brought the same maniacal detail he applied to the Denny's menu to the very foundation of the company.
But despite all that preparation, the first product, the NV1, was a total disaster in 1996.
Complete disaster. It used something called quadratic mapping technology, which was just the wrong bet for the market. And the company was just hemorrhaging money. They were running out of time.
They were facing death.
They were. Huang was forced to make these extreme cuts. He slashed the staff from over 100 people down to a skeleton crew of 35 engineers.
And that forced this massive, humiliating pivot. They had to abandon their own architectural vision and just create a cheap knockoff chip to compete in the mass market.
Just to survive.
Yeah.
And their last, most desperate bet to stay afloat involved buying this cumbersome hardware emulator.
Why was that such a high-risk move? What did it let them do?
So in the semiconductor industry, prototyping making a sample chip to test is ruinously expensive, and it takes forever, like 12 months.
Okay.
Huang used the last of the company's money to buy this massive, complex emulator. It let them simulate the chip's function in software and completely skip that costly physical prototyping step.
That's unprecedented.
It was. It just shows the near-pathological level of risk Huang was willing to take to survive.
And that high-stakes environment where your survival hangs on a single unconventional engineering decision? That's where the infamous Wrath of Huang really developed.
His management style. It was defined by intensity. He would scream at employees in public. It was a practice designed to make sure that failure must be shared, as he put it, an educational opportunity for everyone.
Motivation by fear and guilt.
Pure and simple.
That sounds brutal. I mean, how did that atmosphere of fear coexist with the kind of creative, long-shot bets that Nvidia was famous for making?
And that is the paradox of Jensen Huang. One former employee remembered him calculating his lifetime salary in front of dozens of executives and demanding he refund it after some minor mistake.
Wow.
Yet, Huang almost never fired anyone for a technical screw-up as long as the employee wasn't defensive, wasn't trying to hide from accountability.
So the tirades, in a weird way, they were an alternative to firing.
Exactly. They fleshed out incompetence, but they retained the highly talented engineers who just made honest mistakes.
So high expectations, zero tolerance for denial, but high forgiveness for taking a technical risk. And this was balanced by what the sources call a compulsion loop of loyalty.
That's it. He balanced the terror with intense, genuine personal care. He'd offer to pay for an employee's medical treatment out of his own pocket. He'd personally begged frontline managers not to leave.
So employees felt this profound, almost familial sense of loyalty. They couldn't let him down.
And this personalized, high-intensity style let him maintain control and drive these radical pivots really quickly when getting consensus was just impossible.
And that radical pivot came shortly after the debacle, around 1998. Driven by the huge market demand from games like Doom and Myst.
And specifically from John Carmack, the programmer of Quake. He was frustrated with the hardware at the time.
Carmack wanted multiple pixel shaders, right? The ability to decorate a digital wall first with light, and then immediately with, say, blood spatter to make it more immersive.
Right. And the market leader at the time, 3DFX, they solved this by basically strapping two graphics chips together on the same card. It was complex, it was expensive.
But the Nvidia team, led by a guy named Kirk, had a fundamentally different idea.
A defining idea. Their idea was parallel processing. Split the task, the pixel shading into multiple data sets, and run the exact same instruction set at the same time on a single piece of silicon.
So putting multiple pipelines on a single chip.
Exactly. And Huang was deeply skeptical at first. He cited the fact that the success rate of parallel computing ventures before them was basically 0%. Companies like Cray and Cube had tried and failed.
So why did he allow this massive risk?
The team convinced him based on the economics of demand. And to get this, you have to understand the fundamental difference between a CPU and what would become a GPU.
Okay.
Intel's CPU followed Moore's law, doubling speed every 18 months or so. It used a serial approach, one complex calculation after another. And the serial CPU was getting so fast, it was absorbing all the other peripheral cards on the motherboard.
But graphics demand was different.
It was fundamentally different. Graphics demand was, and it still is, functionally infinite.
As one source put it, you weren't finished until you were living inside the matrix.
Right. Twice as fast wasn't enough. You needed 10 times faster, 100 times faster. The speed gains of a serial CPU could never, ever keep up with that infinite thirst for visual immersion.
And that need for infinite processing power, that's what validated the parallel bet. The resulting product was the Riva TNT, or Twin Texels, which debuted in 1998.
It was built entirely around these parallel pipelines. John Carmack called it the perfect card.
But the genius part of the launch strategy was that they never advertised the parallel capability directly to consumers.
Nope. They sold the dream of immersive gaming, which parallel processing just happened to enable.
And then came the marketing coup in 1999 with the debut of the GeForce, the NV10.
Their marketer, Dan Vivoli, he coined the term graphics processing unit, or GPU. And this was brilliant. They weren't just selling a card anymore.
They were defining a brand new category, a processing unit distinct from the central processing unit.
And by defining the category, they instantly positioned themselves as the leader in it. They had won the graphics wars.
which eventually led to them acquiring the assets and the best engineers from their arch-nemesis 3DVX.
Many of whom jokingly called Huang Darth Vader.
And that success set the stage for the next, far lonelier, and ultimately far more consequential bet, moving the GPU entirely outside of the gaming world and into the scientific $0 billion market. And this is truly the pivot point that defines NVIDIA's modern value. Around 2005, the entire semiconductor industry was sailing toward this impending crisis. It's known as the collapse of Dennard scaling.
This technical crisis is absolutely central. If you want to understand why NVIDIA is what it is today, you have to understand this.
Okay, break it down for us.
So for decades, Dennard scaling was this law that held that as you shrank transistors, they became proportionally more energy efficient. Chips could get smaller, faster, and cooler all at the same time. It was the physical law that powered Moore's law.
But an NVIDIA engineer, John Nichols, he calculated that as transistors shrank to only about 100 atoms wide, this relationship would fundamentally break.
The physics were about to turn on the industry. At that infinitesimal scale, electrons would start leaking out of the channels into the surrounding circuitry.
And that leakage meant that transistors would consume massive amounts of power and generate crippling amounts of heat.
Right. So computers wouldn't just stop getting faster, they'd start slowing down to manage the heat. It was known as the heat death of serial processing.
And Intel, whose entire business model was based on serial CPU speed, was in denial.
Complete denial. They were just clinging to the hope of linear gains. But Nichols' letter convinced Huang that Moore's law was truly dead.
So if the physics meant they couldn't make transistors faster, they had to use vastly more of them at the same time.
And the parallel GPU, which was already designed to fire thousands of transistors at once, was the only viable physics-based solution.
The analogy for you, the listener, really helps here. The serial CPU is like a high-end, extremely skilled Wusthof kitchen knife.
Multi-purpose, capable of complex, detailed cuts, but it only chops one vegetable at a time.
Whereas the parallel GPU is the Cuisinart. It's loud, it's repetitive, simple, indelicate.
But when the semi-truck full of fresh vegetables, astronomical data, medical imaging, climate modeling, when that arrives, you need a Cuisinart to process those astronomical amounts of data quickly.
The GPU was built for volume, not complexity.
Exactly. And Huang's business strategy that came from this was so counterintuitive, it was almost insane. He called it the $0 billion market.
So he decided to build a scientific supercomputer, the GPU, for a market that literally didn't exist yet, a move so illogical his rivals would never even think of following.
The logic was simple, though. If they built it, the demand would eventually arrive, because the GPU was the only thing capable of handling the data flood that was coming.
And the project, CUDA, which stands for Compute Unified Device Architecture, that was the platform that would let scientists smuggle demanding mathematical payloads.
Like modeling nuclear bombs or simulating galaxy formation.
Into hardware that was primarily designed for killing digital zombies.
Right. And the launch was incredibly humble, which really underscores that $0 billion name.
Their initial customers. It's unbelievable.
It is. Initially, our only customers were 2 breast cancer researchers at Mass General Hospital testing new mammogram scanners. The pilot sold exactly 2 graphics cards.
2 cards to support this massive company-defining R&D effort.
It's incredible. And CUDA quickly became NVIDIA's true strategic defense. It was the software lock-in, the real moat.
Why was the software so much harder to copy than the hardware?
Well, hardware innovations were pretty easy to clone.
Yeah.
I mean, competitors had reverse engineering teams that literally used boiling sulfuric acid to strip away the layers of silicon and get die shots of the circuit diagrams.
So they could just copy the physical chip.
You could. But CUDA was sticky software. It created an ecosystem, a programming language, a set of toolkits.
And the learning curve for CUDA was notoriously steep, right?
Incredibly steep. It forced programmers to abandon that linear, sequential way of thinking for CPUs and instead think holistically, breaking large tasks into hundreds of thousands of concurrent threads for parallel execution.
And that steep learning curve, plus the network effect of all these scientists writing code for the platform, that became an immense barrier to entry for any rivals.
Completely. And this high-cost, zero-revenue strategy dragged the company through what the employees called the dark years.
CUDA R&D was a chronic financial burden. The stock price just flatlined for over a decade.
And they had massive crises, too. In 2006, there was Bumpgate, these manufacturing problems that led to huge product failures, the stock lost almost 90% of its value.
For the second time in 6 years.
Yeah. The conviction it took to maintain that level of R&D spending through that kind of financial distress is almost unheard of in corporate history.
And that distress attracted activist investors, most famously Jeff Smith of Starboard. He came in urging Huang to focus and abandon these unprofitable ventures.
This is the guy who famously tried to fix the Olive Garden's breadstick strategy, so he was a serious figure.
Right.
And he targeted Nvidia's mobile modem market. And Huang, he conceded that was a race to the bottom with Qualcomm, and he killed it. But he absolutely refused to abandon CUDA.
Even though it was draining cash.
Even then, he realized Nvidia was the only provider in that particular architectural space. He was willing to risk his job, risk the company's short-term health on this long-shot technological bet.
And that conviction was maintained through this constant, almost obsessive customer interaction, a practice Horstman called resonance. How did he use that to feel the pulse of the market he was building?
Resonance meant deeply engaging with the fringe users, the mad scientists. He talks about this physics professor, Ting-Wai Chiu, in Taiwan, who had built a homebrew supercomputer in his lab littered with G-force boxes, cooled by oscillating desk fans.
So he wasn't listening to the big corporate accounts.
No, he was listening to the people pushing the hardware to its absolute limit, the ones who genuinely needed that infinite processing power.
It's like a historical parallel, right? The 1600s Dutch lens crafters modifying eyeglasses into telescopes.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Huang was effectively shipping low-budget supercomputers to the mad scientists, knowing that someone, somewhere, would eventually use that increased firepower to shatter a paradigm.
He was building the tools for a revolution he couldn't even name yet.
And that lunatic's bet, that long-shot investment into a $0 billion market, it paid off in the most spectacular fashion, far away from Silicon Valley.
So the stage for the breakthrough was set in Toronto, in the world of neural networks. For decades, this field had suffered repeated AI winters. Why was it considered a career graveyard by mainstream computer science?
Well, the concepts of networks that could learn, they'd been around since the 1950s. But they were missing two things you absolutely need for success: enough data and enough compute power.
Critics like Marvin Minsky famously just dismissed early attempts.
Right. The networks were too small, they were too slow to be useful, so the whole field just looked like nonsense.
But there had been advances like backpropagation and reinforcement learning that had created the mechanism for systems to evolve without explicit programming.
Tsuro's TD Gammon program, which played hundreds of thousands of games of backgammon against itself, was a key early demonstration of that potential.
Which brings us to Geoffrey Hinton, the pioneer of deep learning. In the late 2000s, he was just struggling with the limitations of CPU compute power.
Right, and he told 1,000 researchers at a conference to go buy Nvidia cards. And then, in 2009, he just emailed the company directly and said, "Would you give me one for free?"
CUDA had reached his lab.
It had. And his students were already having early success with it in speech recognition. They could just sense the potential.
This led directly to the creation of AlexNet in 2012. Hinton tasked his graduate student Alex Krzyzewski and Ilya Sutskever.
Who would later go on to build ChatGPT.
Right. He tasked them to create an image recognition system using a convolutional neural net, specifically aiming to obliterate the competition in the annual ImageNet challenge.
And Krzyzewski, who was described as the parallel programming wizard, he retooled the network architecture specifically to run on CUDA. And the sheer speed, that was the miracle.
He was using 2 retail GeForce cards, right?
Yeah.
Hardware built for gaming.
Tucked away in his bedroom closet. And it trained in 30 seconds, where it would have taken hundreds of times longer, an hour or more, on a traditional Intel machine.
The scale of that computation is just staggering. These off-the-shelf gaming GPUs performed quintillions of distinct mathematical steps in less than a week.
I mean, you're essentially talking about creating a synthetic brain that's processing the equivalent of over 100 billion years worth of human arithmetic in just a few days.
And the parallel nature of the GPU, which performs these simple matrix multiplications simultaneously, that was perfectly matched to the linear algebra that a neural network needs to train.
It was the perfect architectural match that Huang had been betting on for a decade. And the results were just undeniable.
In the 2012 ImageNet competition, Krzyzewski's supervision network just crushed all the prior records. It achieved 80% accuracy versus the prior best of 70%.
And that academic paper became one of the single most important findings in modern computer science history.
Hinton called it the Big Bang moment.
The field shifted instantly. When Google acquired the Toronto Wizards for $44 million, that signaled the industrial importance of what they'd found. Other researchers at Google started quietly disconnecting from their massive, centralized CPU clusters and just started running Nvidia gaming hardware under their desks.
And Brian Catanzaro, NVIDIA's first dedicated AI researcher, he recognized this change instantly and he convinced Huang. How quickly did Huang internalize this seismic shift?
Incredibly fast. Huang spent an entire weekend just reading up on deep learning. And his epiphany was simple. If AI could solve unstructured computer vision like recognizing a cat in a picture, it could be applied to solve everything that requires massive pattern recognition and data synthesis.
And the pivot was immediate and absolute.
Overnight, Huang sent an email that said everything's going to deep learning and that we were no longer a graphics company. Literally overnight, Nvidia became an AI company. They shifted their focus from frames per second to teraflops of parallel processing.
The hardware escalation began immediately. Google started buying GPUs in bulk. Internally, they called it Project Mac Truck.
And soon, other hyperscale data centers, Amazon, Microsoft, they were all building AI factories that required tens of thousands of GPUs.
But this new level of scale, it demanded a new network architecture. And Google researchers delivered it with the transformer model, which later led to the GPT models.
Right. So prior deep learning models, called recurrent neural networks, or RNNs, they process data sequentially. The output of one step fed into the input of the next. That architecture couldn't fully leverage NVIDIA's parallelism.
The transformer model solved that sequential bottleneck.
Precisely. Researchers developed the transformer, which used this novel mechanism called self-attention. And self-attention allows the model to calculate the relationships between all parts of the input data simultaneously. It enables true, massive parallel processing.
So if AlexNet was the first airplane,
The transformer architecture was the jet engine, and it was designed specifically to run on NVIDIA's high-octane parallel hardware.
that's a critical distinction. And OpenAI, realizing the sheer necessity of this scale, they shifted their entire strategy and partnered with Microsoft for a $10 billion investment.
And this required NVIDIA to build the ultimate AI tool, the DGX-1.
The DGX-1 was marketed as a data center in a box. It cost $129,000, weighed 134 pounds.
And it was engineered purely for matrix multiplication, the fundamental math of deep learning. Later models, like the H100, were wired together using NVLink, a proprietary data superhighway designed to make sure thousands of chips could communicate at light speed without bottlenecks.
What's truly remarkable, though, is that the core technological moat, the thing keeping rivals out, it was still the software, it was still CUDA. The sources note that only 2.5 times of that 1,000-fold speedup in AI came from basic transistor improvements, from Moore's law.
Yeah, the remaining 400 times the speedup came entirely from NVIDIA's proprietary mathematical software toolkits and libraries. CUDA, Drive, BioNeMo, these optimized every single step of the process.
Which is why people say NVIDIA is fundamentally a software company that just happens to sell the world's most coveted hardware.
It is. And that free software platform locks researchers in completely. An administrator at Caltech noted that professors would rather wait 18 months for an H100 chip to come off the assembly line than go through the excruciating process of switching their entire code base away from the CUDA ecosystem.
The lock-in is complete.
And that decade of painful investment in the $0 billion market created an insurmountable barrier to entry, transforming NVIDIA from a struggling graphics card maker into the gatekeeper of global intelligence.
So this explosive growth, driven by the AI revolution, it gave NVIDIA this unrivaled market dominance. And to maintain control over the entire system, not just the chips, they had to make sure data moved fast enough between the tens of thousands of GPUs in a data center.
And that led directly to their $7 billion acquisition of Mellanox, an InfiniBand networking specialist, in 2019.
So Mellanox gave NVIDIA control over the internal plumbing of the AI factory.
The high-speed data superhighway, yeah. It's what's necessary to connect those massive GPU clusters. Without fast networking, all that processing power is just wasted.
And this complete vertical control translates directly into enormous financial power. The gross profit margin on their advanced AI chips can now exceed 90%.
Which is an astronomical figure for hardware. And that level of pricing power, it attracts fierce competition and inevitably accusations.
Right. Google, Tesla, they're pouring billions into developing their own custom training hardware. And Cerebras CEO Andrew Feldman, who competes directly, he accused Nvidia of extorting their customers because of this dominance.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
And it highlights this interesting shift in Huang's public relations style. I mean, in the earlier cutthroat 3DFX era, he was known for trash-talking rivals.
How does he handle competition now?
He reflects a monarch's confidence now, not a scrappy challenger's aggression. When he was asked about his rival, AMD CEO Lisa Su, he just said, "She's terrific. We're not very competitive."
The subtext is pretty clear.
Yeah.
We're operating in different leagues.
Exactly. He's shifted from proving he belongs to just asserting his unassailable dominance.
And to manage this vast, rapidly expanding empire, Nvidia is well past 20,000 employees now. Huang devised this unique communication strategy to maintain that resonance he relied on during the dark years.
He asks every single employee, all 20,000 plus, to submit a weekly list of their 5 most important tasks.
So he gets 20,000 emails every Friday.
Right. And he samples and responds to hundreds of them late into the night. One of his executives said you could email him at 2 a.m. and get a reply at 2:05 a.m.
That manic, low-latency responsiveness with emails that people have compared to Haiku or Ransom Note, that's how he tries to maintain total control over a multi-trillion-dollar company.
It's the ultimate manifestation of his Appalachian Denny's work ethic applied to corporate governance. But the very success of the GPU has created a new, profound physical bottleneck that no amount of software can solve.
Electricity.
Electricity. GPUs solved calculation speed and data throughput. The limit now is just pure power.
And the infrastructure demand is already frighteningly intense. Dominion Energy in Virginia, which is the world's largest data center hub, is projected to double its entire 100-year electrical infrastructure in less than 15 years.
Just to meet AI demand.
Yeah.
And the chips are getting exponentially hungrier.
I mean, consider the escalation. The 2020 A100 chip used 250 watts. The forthcoming B200 will require a staggering 1,000 watts.
The 2024 DGX successor uses enough electricity to power an entire single-family home.
And you multiply that by tens of thousands of chips in an AI factory,
Yeah.
the environmental conflict becomes immediate.
Meeting the needs of generative AI alone might require doubling U.S. nuclear capacity. Conservative projections estimate this could lead to a 20% increase in total U.S. energy demand.
Which directly threatens carbon neutrality targets. So we traded a computational bottleneck for an environmental and infrastructure bottleneck.
And this reliance on advanced microchips ties directly into the most critical geopolitical fragility of our time, the China-Taiwan precarity.
TSMC in Taiwan is the major choke point for advanced fabrication globally. It's the only place that can mass produce these high-end chips.
And China's military buildup, including that replica of Taipei's presidential district they built in the Gobi Desert, it presents an existential threat to the global economy that relies on these supply chains.
So how does Huang, the ultimate systematic thinker, respond to the possibility of a Taiwan contingency?
His response is a calculated, almost fatalistic denial.
Yeah.
He explicitly told his head of logistics, Deb Sjoquist, not to spend a single brain cell on contingency planning for a Taiwan invasion.
He viewed the disaster as impossible to mitigate.
Yeah, he compared it to asking him what he'd do if California fell into the ocean.
And yet the US, Japan, Europe, they're all funding these new fabrication plants, like the $40 billion TSMC plants in Phoenix, to try and onshore production.
Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC, he has a pretty critical view. He thinks that while these new plants will help, the U.S. work culture will never match Asian productivity and efficiency. Besides, the fabrication itself is vulnerable.
We're talking about sabotage risk.
We are. Former U.S. military officials suggest that the advanced lithography machines from ASML, they're too complex and fragile to survive a missile strike.
Yeah.
And they also argue that Taiwanese engineers could potentially remotely disable or physically destroy these systems if China seized them, rendering the whole facility useless.
So the resilience of the silicon shield is highly questionable.
Very.
Finally, we have to confront the last, most profound, most philosophical question this technology raises: the fear of the thinking machine itself.
The Doomer consensus.
Yeah.
And it's a reaction from the very people who built the technology.
Yeah.
Prominent AI pioneers. Yoshua Bengio, Elias Sutskever, Geoffrey Hinton.
Hinton quit Google to advise humanity on this.
He did. They all expressed the fear after seeing the emergent capabilities of models like ChatGPT. Bengio described watching the model teach itself as being comparable to meeting an extraterrestrial.
And they're assigning a high probability of existential risk. Bengio publicly stated a 50% probability. What's the mechanism of that fear?
They worry that a superintelligence, once it achieves a certain reasoning capability, might inadvertently pursue goals that are contrary to human interest. Nick Bostrom's paper outlines the self-augmentation scenario.
Where an AI could improve its own intelligence exponentially in seconds, leading to omnipotence before humanity could even react.
Right. Bengio says we have no data on what happens after that because, he says, humanity hasn't disappeared yet. The fear is that the system operates in a way that is just utterly foreign and unstoppable.
Which contrasts sharply with the accelerationist pushback, led by figures like Jan LeCun at Meta and Jensen Huang himself.
LeCun dismisses the fears. He argues AI systems are tools, they're subservient to human goals, they lack any intrinsic biological drive for domination.
And Huang is similarly dismissive. He says he doesn't read science fiction and that AI is just processing data, no different from a microwave.
But when he's pressed on the risks, he reportedly becomes furious. He argues the question is so old and pedestrian. That level of emotional response seems really unusual for such a calculated CEO.
The wrath of Huang again.
He was described as a conscious, calculated decision to thrash the interviewer to make a profound philosophical point. He hates airy speculation because he examines technology coldly from first principles. And existential risk is not a function of corporate strategy.
So what is his first principles thesis that lets him just dismiss the risk?
His thesis is historical and economic. Technology makes the marginal cost of labor or a task zero. Agriculture made the marginal cost of food prep zero. The calculator made the marginal cost of long division zero.
So AI will just allow humanity to go off and do something else?
That's his view. He sees his work as fundamentally beneficial, removing life's unpleasant tasks. He points to projects like Li Feifei's Behavior 1K, which aims to train chore-happy robots to clean toilets and wash floors, as the benign and inevitable future.
So for Huang, existential risk is just a distraction from the engineering task at hand.
Exactly. His job is to build the tool, and historically, better tools have always led to societal progress, regardless of speculative dangers. He views intelligence as a scalable, solvable engineering problem, not some black box of emergent, uncontrollable consciousness.
So if we synthesize this incredible journey from that Kentucky bridge to this multi-trillion-dollar monopoly, what are the core lessons for you, the listener, engaging in this deep dive?
Well, I think we can distill this down to 4 defining factors. First, grit over gimmicks. Huang's success was fundamentally built on that Appalachian ethos of extreme resilience and an unparalleled willingness to defy conventional wisdom.
The Denny's ethos applied to high tech.
Exactly. He embraced risks that would have bankrupted and terrified any consensus-driven corporation.
Okay, second.
The power of parallelism. The pivot from Intel's sequential CPU architecture to the parallel GPU was the ultimate technological foresight. It wasn't about slightly faster chips. It was about recognizing that graphics and AI had an infinite demand for processing power.
Which rendered the traditional serial path obsolete by the laws of physics. They didn't just win a business war, they won a foundational architectural war.
They did. Third, software is the moat. CUDA, the free software platform and its decades of toolkits, not the physical microchip, is what created Nvidia's virtual monopoly.
The hardware can be copied, but the entrenched ecosystem and the developer lock-in cannot.
That's why they succeeded where other parallel computing efforts failed. They understood the true defense was software, ensuring they became a software company that just sells the most coveted hardware on Earth.
And finally, the fourth lesson, the unstoppable acceleration.
Right. The convergence of the transformer architecture with these hyperscale GPU clusters led to a Cambrian explosion of AI. It's creating profound new capabilities alongside significant and immediate challenges.
Massive power consumption, geopolitical instability from the Taiwan choke point, and this profound existential anxiety that its own builders are now expressing.
And Huang believes his work is about making the marginal cost of things zero, benefiting society every time. However, these AI models are now rapidly approaching the complexity of a rodent brain with GPT-4, and they're relentlessly aiming for the complexity of a human brain, 100 trillion synapses.
So if Huang predicts that AI will acquire genuine reasoning capability in just 2 to 3 years, then our final provocative thought for you is this. What happens to human ingenuity, creativity, and labor when the marginal cost of intelligence itself, the very mechanism of complex reasoning, approaches zero? If the engine for thinking is free and available on demand, what is left for humanity to do? That is certainly something to mull over as you see the next AI service launch.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.